Around AD 110, a ship sailed from Antioch to Rome. Antioch, now in modern-day Turkey, was at that time part of the Roman province of Syria. On board this ship was a remarkable man named Ignatius. At this time, he was the leader of the church in Antioch, one of the earliest Christian churches. The Bible tells us that both Paul and Peter traveled there, and Peter is regarded as its first leader. Now, some years later, Ignatius took on that role. It was not easy to be a Christian at that time, and several persecutions were carried out in the Roman Empire. During one such persecution, Ignatius was arrested and sentenced to death. He was taken on the ship to Rome, where he was to be executed. On this journey, he wrote 7 letters, all which have been preserved to this day. We know Ignatius primarily through his letters, which provide valuable insight into the life and faith of this interesting man. He wrote little about himself, but the content of the letters and their recipients offer some clues about who he was. Of the 7 letters, 5 were addressed to churches in Asia Minor: Ephesus, Tralles, Magnesia, Philadelphia, and Smyrna. 1 was sent to Rome, and 1 was a personal letter to Polycarp. Polycarp was the leader of the church in Smyrna. He was a close friend of Ignatius and an important figure in the early churches, and it was Polycarp who later collected Ignatius's letters, making it possible for us to read them today. Together with Clement, Polycarp and Ignatius are known as the Apostolic Fathers. Ignatius lived in the period following the Apostles' establishment of churches throughout the Roman Empire. His letters show that he was in contact with several of these churches. On his journey to Rome, for example, the ship stopped in Smyrna, where Ignatius met representatives from various churches, including several leaders. In his letters, he sent personal greetings and both encouraged and exhorted the churches. It is clear that Ignatius was a highly respected man. Although Ignatius was a prisoner, he was allowed to receive visitors and write letters, which suggests that he was given a certain degree of freedom. This was probably because being a Christian was not in itself a criminal offense in the Roman Empire. Those who were arrested could often avoid punishment if they complied with the demands of the Roman authorities during interrogation, usually by offering a sacrifice to the Roman gods. Roman religion was largely practical, allowing a variety of beliefs as long as public customs were followed. For Ignatius, this was impossible, since the Bible forbids the worship of other gods. He was therefore fully aware that his life would end when he arrived in Rome. Ignatius' letters follow a structure similar to those found in the New Testament, with personal greetings, encouragement, and exhortations to remain faithful to the teachings handed down from the apostles. He wrote at a time when many different understandings of who Jesus was and what he meant had developed. These ranged from minor variations to more elaborate beliefs that resembled other religions more than the Christianity we recognize today. For example, it was a widespread idea that God was merely one among many gods within a larger system. One such deviant teaching that Ignatius strongly opposed was the claim that Jesus was not fully human. He described this doctrine as a weed that had grown up within the church. In his letter to the church in Tralles, he wrote,
"I urge you, therefore, yet not I, but the love of Jesus Christ. Partake only of Christian food, and keep away from every strange plant, which is heresy." These people, while pretending to be trustworthy, mix Jesus Christ with themselves, like those who administer a deadly drug with honeyed wine, which the unsuspecting victim accepts without fear, and so with fatal pleasure drinks down death. Be deaf, therefore, whenever anyone speaks to you apart from Jesus Christ, who was of the family of David, who was the son of Mary, who really was born, who both ate and drank. who really was persecuted under Pontius Pilate, who really was crucified and died while those in heaven and on earth and under the earth looked on, who, moreover, really was raised from the dead when his Father raised him up. In the same way, his Father will likewise also raise up in Christ Jesus us who believe in him. Apart from him, we have no true life.
Ignatius repeatedly used the word really to emphasize that nothing in Jesus' life was pretend or merely apparent, that he had not only seemed to live and die, as some Christians of that time believed. For Ignatius, the reality of Jesus' humanity made it possible for people to follow him. In other words, Jesus performed his deeds in the same kind of body that all people have. This held particular significance for Ignatius himself, as he was in captivity and faced physical death because he refused to turn away from Jesus. Such loyalty would only have meaning if Jesus himself had truly done the same.
But if, as some atheists, that is, unbelievers, say, he suffered in appearance only, while they exist in appearance only, why am I in chains? And why do I want to fight with wild beasts? If that is the case, I die for no reason. What is more, I am telling lies about the Lord.
Ignatius exhorted the churches to proclaim the true doctrine. One way to discern what is true, he said, is to look at the fruit in the lives of those who follow it. According to Ignatius, the fruit of the true gospel is unity and good works. He especially emphasized unity, closely linking it to the church itself. The church must avoid division, which is prevented when believers submit to one another and to the leaders of the church. As he wrote to the church in Smyrna,
"You must all follow the bishop as Jesus Christ followed the Father, and follow the council of presbyters as you would the apostles. Respect the deacons as the commandment of God. Let no one do anything that has to do with the church without the bishop. Only that Eucharist, which is under the authority of the bishop, or whomever he himself designates, is to be considered valid. Wherever the bishop appears, there let the congregation be. Just as wherever Jesus Christ is, there is the Catholic Church. It is not permissible either to baptize or to hold a love feast without the bishop. But whatever he approves is also pleasing to God, in order that everything you do may be trustworthy and valid."
Ignatius appears to have held considerable authority among the churches. In his letter to his friend Polycarp, he wrote that he would have liked to address all the churches, which they would surely have appreciated, but that he did not have the opportunity because of the limited time he had. The letter to Polycarp is the most personal of Ignatius's writings that we possess. He both exhorted and encouraged Polycarp, who was the leader of the church in Smyrna, especially urging him to preserve unity. Even in his own difficult circumstances, Ignatius strengthened Polycarp in his struggles.
"Do not let those who appear to be trustworthy yet, who teach strange doctrines, baffle you. Stand firm, like an anvil being struck with a hammer. It is the mark of a great athlete to be bruised, yet still conquer. But especially we must, for God's sake, patiently bear all things, so that he may also bear with us. Be more diligent than you are. Understand the times. Wait expectantly for the one who is above time, the eternal, the invisible, who for our sake became visible, the intangible, the unsuffering, who for our sake suffered, who for our sake endured in every way."
Polycarp himself was an interesting figure, well known among the early churches. After Ignatius's death in Rome, it was Polycarp who collected his letters, making it possible for us to read them today. Through these writings, we gain a unique insight into the early churches, which stayed connected through letters and visits, and continued to carry the apostles' teachings into the 2nd century. After Polycarp collected the letters, they were read, preserved and translated, continuing to be passed down to the present day. Ignatius came to hold a special place among Christians, especially as one who remained faithful unto death. The letters to Tralles, Smyrna and Polycarp were published in full in Hidden Treasures in 1916. These writings focus particularly on the unity of the Church and the importance of clarity in doctrine. In the articles that Elias Aslaksen wrote for the magazine, he frequently quoted Ignatius' letters, especially in connection with their exhortations on unity. The article that Smith published immediately after the letter to Tralles in August 1916 is titled Purification and Service, and was written by the German author Georg Steinberger. In it, he writes that,
"In order to do the living God a living service, we need the deeper purification. Purification not only from evil deeds, but also from dead deeds."
Furthermore, he writes about how one cannot be of help to others without seeing that one's own abilities are inadequate and that one is not good for anything except what God works. To illustrate the point at the very end, the editor includes a quote from Ignatius.
I have much knowledge in God, but I do not rise above my measure, lest I be lost in boasting.
It is clear from Ignatius' letters that he was an important figure in the early church. At the same time, he has also remained significant to Christians throughout history. Everything we know about him comes from what was written during a very short period of time. Yet these writings offer insight into a man who remained faithful to the end of his life, determined to do what his faith required of him.